a Times Union podcast.
Last time on Long Buried, we found out a lot more about Karen Ramsey and her husband, John, including what their lives were like at the condo they purchased in Brewster, New York, hosting barbecues, riding dirt bikes, and raising a young daughter. It seemed idyllic, but beneath the surface, it was anything but calm.
They didn't have a great relationship.
We also met Jeannie White, the Ramseys' neighbor and Karen's good friend. Karen confided in Jeannie about her marriage with John. Jeannie also told Karen about troubles with her husband, Ed, which makes it a little ironic that they ended up having affairs with each other's husbands. These two women felt trapped in bad marriages, but only one of them got out. That's why, in this episode, I want to tell you more about Karen Angelillo Ramsey and about what happened to her. I'm Philip Pantuso. This is Long Buried, an investigative podcast from the Times Union. You're listening to episode 4, She Had a Big Heart. Before we begin, a word of caution. This episode contains references to domestic violence. Please take care as you listen. If you or someone you know needs help, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE or visit our website for a list of additional resources. A murder is the most wrenching crime that can occur in a community, a neighborhood, a family. And when the victim is not a public figure, often how they died becomes all they're known for. In this case, those charged with seeking justice did not open an investigation until the victim had been dead 44 years. Hardly anyone looked for Karen Ramsey. It's heartbreaking, and to be honest, it pisses me off. That's why, from the beginning, from the articles I wrote when this case first broke to this podcast, it has been important to me to tell a story that honors Karen Angelillo Ramsey as someone more than a victim. This person lived a full, albeit short, life. She had hopes and dreams that were never realized. What was she like? What could she have become?
Karen was, she was always cool, I guess, like the way she dressed.
Jeannie's recollections of Karen brought her to life for me in a new way.
It's not casual, the word I'm looking for, but a little hippie, I guess. I can't think of another word, Even the way, like, she would bring Jennifer over and, she would be in these adorable outfits. And I was like, where did you get them? And like, she was different. She had her own style, and it was fun. It was definitely a fun style.
Karen Angelillo was born on Tuesday, January 25th, 1955, at St. Agnes Hospital in White Plains. I found a brief birth announcement in the Reporter-Dispatch newspaper. Her father was Clement Angelillo, a first-generation Italian-American who was born in Long Island City. He was a paving superintendent and fought in World War II in England for the Air Force. Karen's mother was Catherine Ward Angelillo, a stay-at-home mom and active community member at Holy Rosary, a Catholic parish the family attended. Karen grew up in Thornwood, a well-to-do hamlet smack in the middle of Westchester County, about 30 miles north of Manhattan. She had 2 sisters, both a decade or more older. They had already married and left home by the time Karen came of age. In 1971, when Karen was just 16, her father died. He was 59. These factors, her sisters leaving home, her father dying at a fairly young age, seem to have had an effect on Karen. Many people I spoke to who knew her felt like she was distant from her family.
I always thought it was so strange that I never met family, never met friends. Like, it was just her and John and Jennifer.
Actually, I've pretty much known Karen all of her life.
That's Marie Lupinski Nankervis. She met Karen at Holy Rosary Catholic School.
I look back on it now and remember little things about her that made me kind of wonder, what was going on at home at that time. I never realized it then, but my thought now is that there was something about her home life because she was kind of withdrawn.
Like her sisters, Karen went to Catholic elementary school. But unlike them, she switched to public school by 5th grade. When she started high school in 1968, she had an after-school job at a grocery store, and she was into performing arts. She helped form Westlake High School's theater club, which took students to New York City to see Broadway performances. I found a copy of Westlake's yearbook from 1972. There's a photo of Karen with this theater club. She's standing in the back row, half obscured by smiling young thespians on either side of her. It's difficult to make out her face, but you can see that Karen is not smiling for the camera. Karen is also not really smiling in her senior photo in the same yearbook. Her eyes are big and soft, slightly crinkled at the corners. I'd call her expression a smize. Her wavy brown hair tumbles just over her collarbone, parted off center, a swoop of bangs slanting above her left eyebrow. She looks friendly. Maybe a little awkward, like she's slightly uncomfortable in the stilted setting of a school portrait session. I also found a newspaper clip from this time period that mentions Karen Angelillo. A few years before she started high school, she and some friends in Thornwood organized a puppet show to raise money for a local newspaper's fundraiser to send 500 children to summer camp. The puppet show brought in $17.70. Karen was 12 at the time.
It's really hard to describe Karen. I think about it now, which I didn't realize at that point in time, that she was very quiet, sort of timid, a lot like me. We just kind of just stepped back and watched everything else go on. But she never really opened up about anything.
But there were occasions, even in high school, where a different Karen would come out. The vivacious, almost hippie Karen that later friends would discover. In high school, Karen was also a member of the French club. She was one of the few sophomores to join the juniors and seniors on the club's ski trip to France and Switzerland in 1970. They crossed the Atlantic on the world's first jumbo jet, a Boeing 747 that had been certified for service just 4 months prior. The New York Daily News did a feature on this trip. That's how I first found pictures of Karen that hadn't been released by the police. Two of Karen's best friends from this time, Carol Wheeler and Susan Du Bois, told me about this trip. Carol and Susan did not want to speak on the podcast, but they shared some amazing details. The teenagers from Westchester were set loose on the Parisian streets, which were still missing cobbles from the 1968 student riots. They saw the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. The girls flirted with French guys. They climbed the tower staircases of Notre Dame, drank mint tea in the Latin Quarter, and wandered Montmartre, where Karen and Carol bought matching paintings from a street artist. Carol also shared photos from this trip. You can see them on our website. They really tell a story. There's Karen in a long-sleeve blue dress, standing on the roof of Notre Dame, with her friend Walter. Karen sitting on the steps down to the Seine, hands in the pockets of a navy pea coat, looking down at the photographer standing on the banks of the river. Susan, Karen, and Carol standing on the tarmac in New York, waiting to board the plane that would take them on this memorable trip. After Paris, it was off to Geneva for 2 days. Then a week at the alpine ski resort Courchevel. Carol remembers Karen dancing with a member of the French Olympic ski team. She also remembers Karen didn't know what the hotel bidet was for. She filled it with crushed ice and canned Pepsi. In a photo from the ski resort, Karen stands among a group of friends. Carol says they were all singing Beatles songs on their last night. Karen was in full voice when the camera flashed. Mouth wide, hands mid-clap, the glasses she didn't wear in yearbook photos perched on her face. Karen seemed to grow more confident the older she got. Here's Karen Angelillo Carvalho, a fellow dirt bike enthusiast who rode with a group John was a part of. She met Karen on a few occasions.
A couple of times I did meet her. She just hit me as being very independent. I remember one time she was pregnant. I wanted to help her carry groceries, and she said, no, I do it myself.
I talked to many people about Karen's life. Some didn't want to be part of the podcast for various reasons. We wish we could say more about her. But one thing is clear. Almost everyone who met Karen Angelillo Ramsey remembered her well. As Carol told me, quote, "I've never forgotten Karen. We were really close. She was smart, smart-mouthed, and funny, lit up any room she was in, and was a magnet for guys." Her grade school friend, Marie Nankervis, has never forgotten Karen either.
This has got me in a whirl. I'm heartbroken over this. She was a good person. I mean, she had a big heart.
What makes you say that?
Well, because she was really good to me, and there were times, I needed a friend to lean on, and vice versa, and we were there for each other.
She had a good heart. She was a really good person.
What Marie said reminded me of something Jeannie had told me. They each knew Karen at different points in her short life. Marie remembers a shy girl, the youngest in a church-going family. Jeannie remembers a young mother, more comfortable in her own skin, an independent 20-something, full of life. Yet both of these women also felt that something was troubling Karen. After high school, Marie moved away from upstate New York, and she lost touch with Karen. The last she heard about her old friend was on a trip back home.
I recall my mom talking to me one day when I went to my mom's house, and she said, I ran into Karen today. She was telling me that she had gotten married. I was actually quite surprised that she had married because I didn't figure that she would be that outgoing.
We'll be right back.
"12-year-old Jalek Rainwalker vanished without a trace from a small upstate New York village on a cool November night in 2007. His adoptive parents say he ran away. Police believe he was murdered, but a body has never been found, and a suspect has never been named.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
all right, but you don't want to talk.
Then when I learned they were trying to undo the adoption, that's when I learned that this story was very complicated, well, a lot more complicated than I even thought.
Almost 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Wendy Libertar.
In this podcast from the Times-Union, we take a deep dive into the mystery of this missing child and try to find some answers.
So have you come to terms that Jalek is probably dead?
Yes.
Okay.
I feel that he was killed on November 1st, 2007.
Available now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to Long Buried.
Do you mind sitting there just so you guys are kind of closer together so I can...
My producer Jessica Marshall and I were back in Jeannie's dining room.
When the police came to you and first said her name, did you immediately...
Remember her?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I was shocked. But yeah, I did it right away. As soon as they said Brewster, I immediately thought of, Holly Stream and Karen and John. And when they said Karen's name, I can picture her in my mind clearly. I still can.
New York State police investigators still don't know exactly what happened to Karen Ramsey, or exactly when. They have theories, but there are big gaps in the story. Here's what we do know.
So it would have been May 11th, 1980. That's when Mother's Day was in 1980, that Karen and John were supposed to go to some type of Mother's Day dinner brunch at, I think, one of the sisters' house in Yorktown.
That's State Police investigator Joseph Morrissey.
And then when Karen didn't show up, they called John at the condo where they lived at, Holly Stream Courts, and John apparently appeared distraught and upset to them on the phone and just said that Karen ran away and she didn't want to be a wife or a mother anymore. That was really the last they ever heard of Karen.
In the initial press release following the identification of Karen's remains, state police said Karen Ramsey had, quote, not been seen or heard from since May of 1980. That's accurate, but it's not entirely right, because we don't actually know the last time anyone saw Karen Ramsey. For her sisters, it was Christmas 1979. The last interaction Karen had was with Carol Wheeler in the spring of 1980. Carol and Karen remained close after high school. They shared a basement flat after graduation. They went to summer jam at Watkins Glen in July of 1973. Carol later moved away for her career, but she would see Karen on trips back home to New York. One afternoon in the late winter or early spring of 1980, Carol went out to lunch with Karen and John. She doesn't remember the exact date, but she does remember that there was still ice on the reservoirs. Carol also remembers she saw John bully Karen that day. And she said John had begun to limit his wife's contact with family and friends. A few months later, sometime that summer, Carol says she called the Holly Stream Court condo, hoping to catch up with her friend. John answered the phone and told her Karen had left him. He told her to never call again.
I have a theory that Karen was probably killed in the spring of 1980 because of the lighter. It was produced after 1980. And frankly, it's pretty difficult to bury a body like that in the winter. So I'm surmising sometime between May and April is probably when she was put in the ground. However, theoretically, it could have been any time after 1980.
Digging through the paper trail of Karen and John's life together, I found records of their eventual divorce. On May 9th of that year, John Ramsey filed for divorce in Westchester County Court on the grounds of, quote, abandonment and cruel and inhuman treatment. He then filed a court summons for the divorce proceeding in a local newspaper, the same one that had chronicled Karen's puppet show fundraiser more than a decade earlier. That's what you have to do in New York if your spouse abandons you and you can't find them. State law says you can serve the divorce papers via a newspaper. You have to publish the summons at least once over 3 successive weeks. John Ramsey did exactly that in September 1980. The divorce was granted on November 24th, according to a certificate of disposition from the Westchester County Clerk.
Another strange thing about this too was, a lot of people that we interviewed that lived in the condos that were not John's direct friends would kind of paint the picture of some domestic trouble. And even when I would talk to people in the condos and try to ask them if they remember John and Karen, a lot of people would say, oh, the unhappy married couple.
Investigator Morrissey made clear that no one police interviewed described witnessing signs that John had been violent. No reports of black eyes or other physical harm.
They would hear them yelling in their apartment. And, I guess a lot of times when there was like a social circle and people talking, and if Karen was there, she'd be talking. And then if John came in the circle, she would stop talking.
Subtle things. The kind of behavior that could be interpreted differently depending on circumstances, and reinterpreted in light of new information. But if anyone suspected, back then, that Karen was in a dangerous situation, well, that too is lost to time.
You keep in mind the history of domestic reports. I mean, they really didn't start becoming more formal and official probably till like after the O.J. Simpson case, so think about that. And this is 1980.
For the younger listeners out there, the O.J. Simpson trial was in 1995. The media dubbed it the trial of the century.
They used to argue a lot.
Bob Beckerick was one of the neighbors who heard Karen and John fighting at Holly Stream Court. He and his wife lived in the condo above the Ramseys. Bob and his wife, Joanne, were like many other couples at Holly Stream Court, young newlyweds just getting started in their careers. But they didn't have children and they didn't socialize much with the Ramseys.
And we weren't that close to friends, like neighbors.
But Bob did get to know John when they would go out into the woods together to collect firewood. They became somewhat friendly while lugging their chainsaws around in tandem.
As a couple, they were into dirt biking. That was like they were out every weekend on their motorbikes, dirt biking, where you have to wear the shin guards and the shoulder pads and all the other. So they were into being out in the outdoors in their dirt bikes. They each had one. I remember he had a sweatshirt that said, "Put something hot and exciting between your legs." And it was a picture of a motorcycle.
Wow. Initially, Bob got the impression that John and Karen had a pretty normal relationship. But over time, John started to vent more and more about problems they were having. Bob started to get the impression that things might not be so great between Karen and John around the time she got pregnant with their daughter. So John would complain when Karen got pregnant.
Well, they complained that she was irritable, He called it the pregos or something like that.
Huh. After Karen gave birth to Jennifer in 1977, she joined La Leche League. That's an international nonprofit advocacy group that supports new and expecting mothers with breastfeeding. Each La Leche League chapter has a local leader who is specially trained to help mothers with breastfeeding. These leaders organize group meetings, often in people's homes, where mothers can share their own experiences and trade tips. At the time, La Leche League was considered kinda hippy-dippy, crunchy granola parenting stuff. The women's rights movement had brought breastfeeding back into fashion during the 70s. I'm not sure if Karen became a La Leche League leader, but several people told me she was heavily involved with the group and did host meetings at her and John's apartment at Holly Stream Court. Once the baby arrived, Karen's priorities shifted.
She changed a lot from being not wanting any kids and biking to becoming over-the-top mama, But that happens, I guess.
And it sounds like John was not really thrilled with that change.
No.
Yeah.
Because it would cut into his biking.
In the late 70s, Bob began working on an MBA. It was a quarter-life career pivot. He already had a degree in chemistry, but he wanted to become a pharmaceutical salesman to make more money. He kept his job as a technical chemist while he made progress on the MBA, often working late into the night. One night, during the late winter or early spring of 1980, he remembers burning the midnight oil to study. He doesn't remember the exact date, but Bob says he remembers this particular night because something startled him. It was coming from the apartment below.
But I heard the scream in the middle of the night.
A scream in the middle of the night. At first, Bob didn't think much about it. He was used to Karen and John's fighting by this point. When Bob saw John the next day, he asked about what he'd heard.
Well, I heard the screaming, and I think I remember I saw John. Is everything okay with the baby? So, I couldn't have any way to question. I just thought it was odd.
But a few days later, Bob saw something else. Something that, paired with what he learned more than 40 years later had happened to Karen Ramsey, has caused him to reinterpret what he witnessed between Karen and John.
I remember seeing John a couple of days later throwing out all of his wife's motorcycle stuff in the dumpster. He moved out not too long after that.
After that particular argument where you heard the scream, did you ever see Karen again after that?
No. No.
For investigator Morrissey, finding Bob Beckerick seemed to break open the case. Several clues were starting to make John Ramsey look suspicious. Both Bob and Carol had last seen Karen Ramsey in the late winter or early spring of 1980. John was then seen throwing away his wife's stuff. Several people who knew the couple told police that there appeared to be trouble in the relationship at that time. But there's one thing Bob told me, and told investigator Joe Morrissey, that remains hard to explain.
Mr. Beckerick kept asking me, is the baby okay? Is the baby okay? And I said, why are you asking me that? And he goes, well, John said the baby left too. So did you guys find, he asked me if we found a dead baby. And I was like, no.
According to the police and to Bob Beckerick, John told Bob that not only had Karen left, but she'd taken Jennifer too. It was a different version of the story he later told Karen's friends and family about her disappearance. To me, this detail complicates the narrative. Had Karen left with the baby, as she'd done before, but returned, only to be murdered later? By John? Or by someone else? If John did it, maybe he was in a panic and hadn't settled on a story when he told Bob that the baby was gone too. Also, did Bob's memory of what John told him distort over the decades? And if Karen had taken Jennifer sometime after Bob heard the scream in the late winter or early spring of 1980, did John report it? There's no record of that, and he doesn't appear to have told that to anyone other than Bob. Maybe Karen's leaving was so routine that John didn't feel the need to report it to the police. But then, why did he throw out her clothes mere days later?
Where was the baby when this was all going on? I still don't have the answer to that question.
John later told people that Karen left because she was overwhelmed raising a child. As Jeannie told us.
And he used to say she doesn't want to be a mother. She never wanted to be a mother.
Maybe that was true at some point. But one thing I'm starting to feel confident about is that by the time Karen was killed, she no longer felt that way. After all, almost everyone who met Karen Angelillo Ramsey remembered her.
Karen wouldn't do that. Karen would not walk away like that. She wasn't that type of person. There's no way she would walk away from a child.
Next time on Long Buried.
Everybody has secrets for the most part in their life, especially if you keep living.
We pick up the police investigation into Karen's murder. And we learn more about John Ramsey.
We got divorced because he just wasn't so interested. He didn't have any, how do I put it, passion.
As much as I can't bring myself to believe that my brother would have done that, but how can you put it? I just can't imagine him doing that.
Long Buried is a Times Union podcast. This series was reported and written by me, Philip Pantuso. It was produced and edited by Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith and Casey Seiler. Special thanks to George Ruiz for design. Our web editors are Daniel Roberts and Kat Simon. Our theme music was composed and performed by Martin D. Fowler. Additional music by Nina Harris, Peter Conway, Rob McAllister, C. Minor, and Kronborg by Getty Images. To see photos from Karen's yearbook and from her school trip to France and Switzerland, visit timesunion.com/longburied. If you have questions about this case or want to share any information you may have about it, email us at podcast@timesunion.com.